welcome to another edition of the Atacs podcast, where adults talk about cool stuff. And today we are talking about our favorite video games of 2023. Perhaps some of the coolest stuff, if you will. The date today is December 30th, 2023. I'm your host today. I'm Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me today is Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How are you, Nate?
I am doing just fine. Ready to close out the year.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do either of your children have a game of the year?
Probably. They have played exactly 2 video games this year.
Uh-huh.
The 2 video games they have played, which is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, to jump around as Princess Peach, or My Friend Peppa Pig, which is available through Xbox Game Pass.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. It's important that we have that input.
Yeah.
All demographics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also joining us, who you just heard, is Will from Wendell, North Carolina. How are you, Will?
Temporarily coming to you from State College, Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's true. Will is traveling this holiday season.
Yeah, I'm doing fairly well. Had some irritating muscle pain over the last couple of weeks, but I think we're on the other side of it. You know, we're getting through it. You know, it's one of these benefits that you're entitled to when you get old.
So many great benefits as we age.
Yeah.
And rounding out our panel today, we have Ryan from New York. How are you, Ryan?
I'm okay. I guess not much else to say. Closing out the year.
No children with Game of the Year or muscle pain, so we're good to go. Today as mentioned, we are talking about our favorite video games of 2023, the year that was, our games of the year, so to speak. Our format for this year is the same as last year for anyone who listened, which I'll describe again. So we are each going to discuss our top 5 games of the year in order, and we will count them down from 5 to 1, and we will start with our number 5s. We'll go around. Everyone can talk about their number 5s with a catch. If anyone else's has that same game at a higher position, we will delay talking about that game until later. So we kind of naturally filter in order so that the games higher on people's lists get talked about later. Anything I missed? Anything either of you guys have to say?
Nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I guess before that, which I should have done this first, a little table setting question is, how did you guys feel about the year for games? Do you feel like this was a strong year for game releases, or, just how did you feel about the year overall?
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess, it's hard to argue. I've heard people say that 2023 has been one of the strongest years for video games, maybe ever. And I wouldn't argue against that 2023 has definitely been a strong year. I have a bit of a hard time putting my finger on, and for me, I don't know that some of my favorite games of all time necessarily came out this year. If you think back to years like 2017, you had the release of the Switch, you had Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, along with Horizon Zero Dawn. So a whole slew of games. We've obviously had a lot of good years in the past, but it does feel like this year in 2023, a lot of big sequels, a lot of, big franchises and AAA releases. Some of them I personally didn't play. So I didn't really play Diablo 4 or the Resident Evil 4 remake, but we've just seen a lot of successes in things like Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears of the Kingdom, and just huge releases, tentpole releases. And then also some successful indies that came out of nowhere, stuff like Dave the Diver, these kind of niche games like Wild Hearts, I think was this year. And it's
It
easy to
was.
forget that like back in like what February that just kind of dropped, that maybe a couple months of hype, but it was kind of a surprise. But yeah, it's hard to deny that it's been a super strong year for games. I think this year, even if like some of the biggest hitters I didn't play, didn't get around to, or just wasn't interested in, like it still just had tons and tons of stuff, like at kind of all levels of the, you know, from AAA to indie.
Yeah, it feels like this is the year where all the delays from the COVID years just all got bundled up for this year. And yeah, I mean, Ryan, you already mentioned like a half dozen or so like really big names. It doesn't get much bigger than like Zelda and Diablo and those types of things. But there was also there's a new Street Fighter, a new Final Fantasy, a new Spider-Man. Like it's like almost every month had one or two just like the biggest franchises that exist in video games. Like it was just kind of nonstop all year. So like I think even if those specific games weren't necessarily your type of game, like I think it's kind of hard to deny that there was just so much stuff this year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what the two of you said. Although I will say that like some of the games that maybe I was anticipating the most didn't end up having the impact on me that I kind of thought they would. But then there's also games that I didn't I didn't anticipate, or I didn't know were coming out, and then I really really enjoyed. So you mentioned Diablo 4 earlier, Ryan, and I don't think that's going to be on any of our lists. Although we've got some Diablo fans in the house, me and Nate. So sometimes you wait a long time for something, and then it finally drops, and you're like, yeah, what are we doing here? But it was a pretty strong year overall, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you have so many big games like this, yeah, not all of them are going to hit, but also enough of them are. Like, I think in that huge list, we didn't even mention. There's still plenty we didn't even mention. Jedi Survivor, Alan Wake 2. Like, there's just tons. Like, we could just keep going. Mario Wonder, Armored Core, like. And like there might be some that don't hit for you like Diablo, but then there's going to be others that will surprise. And it's like when you have, and I think what makes a good year to me is like you have so many games that it doesn't even matter if some of them don't hit because there's going to be plenty that do. Like there's just so many.
Right.
Yeah, it is easy to forget, like just looking back, like thinking back, oh, like there was a new Fire Emblem like in January, like because there have been so many games. And like you said, this has been a year where like I'm glad I have been comfortable not playing everything, and like, or sometimes I'll pick up a game and just be like, well, like Octopath Traveler 2, I'm glad I own this game. Like maybe I'll play it in the future, maybe I won't. Like, but it's just it's been it's a good year to be able to kind of like curate your backlog and like put things like on the be comfortable with putting things on the shelf, like, and saying I may never get around to playing this, like just because there has been so much to play. At least I feel like that. There's definitely been more than other years. I think there's been like a handful of games I've done that with where it's like I see it on sale and it's like, okay, I'll grab this. Looks like a good game, like, but I may or may not play it anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah, for me, this has definitely been the year of like, I hope I'll get to that sometime, and then like the other side of that Will was talking about was like quite a lot of games this year that I started and didn't finish, which is, I've never been like a big stickler about finishing games, but this year I just threw it out the window, like not worrying at all about finishing a game. It's like if I start a game and it's not hitting with me, there's plenty more things to move on to. I'm just not gonna stick with it. So I have a very low track record this year of actually finishing games compared to my normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely echoing what all of you have said. Yeah, I definitely this year more than any other year in a long, long time, I did not keep up with everything and am chucking a ton of games onto the backlog. Where the past few years, especially, I've played everything I wanted to play during the year. I was able to do everything, but this year, not even close. There's just so many. So we are bringing you our top 5 games, but as
Work in progress.
as most of us have said, there are plenty of great games we didn't even get to. So this is what we've played and our favorites as of December 30th, right at the end of the year. And with that, I think we should get to talking about some video games. What do y'all think about that?
Do it.
Hey, I think good things about that.
All right.
What? Why would we do that?
All right, so let's get it rolling. So yeah, as described, we'll start with our number 5s and count it down. So Nate, I'm going to put you on the spot to get us started off here. What is your number 5 video game of 2023?
My number 5 video game for the year is called Doomblade.
Okay. I think that's probably Ryan's number 1.
I think this is probably a safe one that nobody else has on their list.
So I did play it, but yes, it is not in my top 5. So tell us what you like so much about Doomblade, Nate.
Doomblade is a pretty short, focused Metroidvania, 2D indie Metroidvania game, of which there are many. This is definitely a type of game that I like them when I like them. I don't play all of them. But in particular, I think Doomblade has a very streamlined take on the genre of 2D indie Metroidvanias, where you make progress very quickly, you explore a interconnected map and gain new abilities, and has kind of a unique basic control scheme and combat style where you are more or less moving your character around like a normal 2D platformer, and then kind of separately moving a cursor around the screen. If you're playing with mouse and keyboard, you do that with the mouse. If you're playing with a controller, you kind of move the cursor with the right stick and kind of target things in the environment or enemies with that cursor, and then can just like, as your basic attack, kind of dash to them and bounce off of them and deal damage. And that becomes like your core combat and traversal mechanic that is used throughout the whole game. So I always like when games take a well-worn genre and then just say, like, let's make the core concept a little bit different and see what we can do with that and base the whole game around that. And Doomblade does that really well. I also think it generally has a pretty neat art style, and it really, for me, nailed that feeling in a short time window, which was appreciated this year with all the long games of, like, you start the game with basically no ability to traverse or explore, and you feel so limited, and by the end of that game you are just flying around, like, completely mastered this interconnected map. And it just feels good.
Yeah, you made a point that we didn't make in our opening, is that not only were there a lot of games this year, I think most of them were like, I think the average length of games has just gone up so much that like many of those games were long, and so the short ones can be nice for sure.
Yeah, no, this was an appreciated short game in my summer, where I just could sit and like finish a game in a day or two and have a really, really good time with it, and it just felt like a well-made experience from the beginning to the end.
Mm-hmm. Did you play this with mouse and keyboard or on a controller or gamepad?
I tried it with both, and I ended up I think playing more on mouse and keyboard, but I started with gamepad and then kind of switched back and forth, and I liked both for different reasons. But settled on the mouse and keyboard just for the more precise aiming on the cursor mechanic.
Yeah, that's how I ended up playing it too, which surprised me because it looks, it's a 2D side-scrolling action platforming game, and like I tend to associate that with a controller for sure. But the mouse and keyboard controls to me, I settled into that actually fairly quickly. It's like, no, this feels like the the way to play.
Yeah, it definitely feels better.
Mhm.
For combat stuff. I still like you, I tend to gravitate towards a gamepad when it's 2D platforming, but for that,
Aiming the dash to dash to enemies, just like
yeah,
that's really what the game was built on to me, and being able to target enemies with a mouse that way just felt very critical.
yeah,
And correct me if tell me if you agree with this. I feel like that is kind of the main hook of this game. I feel like if you like that style of combat and dashing into enemies, like this game's really going to sing for you. And if that doesn't click for you, that's probably the game's probably going to be a hard sell.
yeah, probably. I think you could probably watch some video of it and see some combat and kind of tell if that style is for you or not. Where it's very, it's not that it's really fast or demanding, but like you're moving very quickly when things are happening between targets and like making decisions about where you need to be and kind of zipping around the environment, which I think felt really satisfying. But yeah, if that doesn't work for you, then that is the core hook of the game for sure.
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, awesome. That's your number 5. Glad you liked it.
Yeah,
Doomblade. Yeah, no, it is pretty neat for sure. So that was Nate's number 5 is Doomblade, and we'll move on to Mr. Will. What is your number 5 of the year?
This is probably gonna earn me some side eyes. But right now, I actually have Final Fantasy XVI. It's my number 5 game.
Nice. We have converted Will finally.
All right.
So
that's super cool.
Does anyone else have
this?
Does anyone else have this higher on their list?
No. I am currently playing that game, so I would not have considered it with how far I am, but I can say based on what I played, it would not be on my list.
So this came out back in June, and it was developed by the wonderful, creatively named Creative Business Unit 3, which I just try to I look for every opportunity to say the name of this developer because I think it's hilarious. Anyway, so
already off to a good start.
Yeah, so I kind of thought that for the longest time, I haven't really been historically into what are uncreatively, unfairly named JRPGs. And I haven't really been that big of a fan of, games where you don't really have the freedom to kind of create your own character. You're playing with this dude who kind of already has a personality, and he already has stuff he likes to do. I'm not really into parties. But then again, this game seemed closer.
Hold up. What type of parties are you not into, Will?
Mario parties. Definitely not into those. So yeah. But this one, you're playing with this one dude, and of course you can control a dog or not control a dog, but mostly, at least so far. And I guess for clarity, I'm also not finished with this, Nate. I think I'm like approaching halfway. I think I'm on like main quest 18 or something. I was trying to figure out about how far I am. But the things I guess that I've enjoyed about it thus far, one is some of these giant like boss spectacle fights, and it reminds me of like PS2 God of War, when you're fighting these like enormous icons and maybe you're embodying an icon at that moment. And something about that I find just super exciting. And I found that I kind of missed moments like that in games, because a lot of the stuff that I play, you're not playing as some sort of, giant, King Kong ass dude or whatever. So that was kind of fun to me. I thought the arsenal of moves that you have, I mean, I don't know that you could go so far as to create a build, but you could definitely lean in certain directions, and the little equipment that you find helps you to kind of lean in one way or not. I found some of the characters to be compelling and pretty interesting, most notably, Sid, which I think a lot of people have pointed out this year. But I also thought Benedicta was really interesting, and Yugo, the guy who embodies the Titan icon or whatever, where he's like walking and flattening buildings and everything or whatever. But I find their personalities to be really interesting, and kind of compelling. I mean, at the same time, I think the reason this time didn't get higher, I do find the enemies a bit spongy, even though the game overall, I wouldn't say it's difficult. And I think some people have actually said it's too easy. But the enemies do seem to have quite a bit of health, even if you're like on the edge in terms of all of your upgrades. Also, I thought it's a bit long on cutscenes, but maybe that's just a Final Fantasy thing. I mean, there were definitely times where I'm like, man, I'm just kind of watching movies, like.
Yeah, that's pretty par for the course.
Yeah. So that was new for me as a Final Fantasy person, because I mean, really, the only one I had any experience with was Nate's number 5 from last year, Final Fantasy Origins. I don't know where you had it, Nate, but
I don't remember. Somewhere around there.
Yeah,
I think it was 6 or 7 because it wasn't in the discussion 5.
Right, which I've been told isn't really representative of what it means, So,
some would argue that 16 is also not really representative.
Yeah, right. So, but anyway, I've had a good time with it thus far. I mean, it's super long because every game this year seems to be long, and I do anticipate. I look forward to getting back to North Carolina, getting back to my PS5, picking it up again, and running around with Clive and shredding some dudes and getting more icon powers and stuff. So, but yeah, I guess so far I'm having a good time.
Yeah, no, I do think Final Fantasy 16 does some cool stuff. Like, I like what they're going for with the setting and the style of it. I like the concept of the icons and the dominance and all of their proper nouns and
I was just about to say.
And how all those interplay and affect like the world politics, and they're very like clear and upfront with their like Game of Thrones inspiration and like that style of dark fantasy being something they're kind of chasing, and I think it's an interesting direction. I don't mind most of that stuff so far. I'm not nearly as far as you are, and I would say that the basic combat against like fodder enemies is super boring to me. I'm hoping that will get better as I play more. But some of the boss fights I've had a little bit of fun with, and I'm waiting for more of the big ridiculous kaiju fights, and I want more of that and more.
Yeah, there's some waiting on you.
Yeah, so I'm hoping I'll turn a little bit more positive on it, but I do think there's some cool stuff there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing really to compare and contrast it with because, to be honest, it's the only, I guess, mainline numbered Final Fantasy game I've played. So
Right.
I've got really very little to say, well, gosh, this one doesn't do this, and the other ones did this so well. I'm just like, well, here we are in Darkville.
I don't know.
Clive's got a face tattoo. All right.
Yeah, I don't even know that it's really necessary to have the comparison points. I think this game, from what I've seen, stands on its own, and that's totally fine. Like, it's as one thing that's nice about Final Fantasy is each game is distinct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, bro dudes driving around in the vehicle, which I guess was the main takeaway that I heard about 15.
Yep.
That one didn't pull me in, but bad boy Clive and Sid, I guess that was enough to get me to pull the trigger on it. Also, someone lent me this game, so that kind of makes it easy to try anything, when you got someone to lend it to you.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but
go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I was gonna say, you were saying you might get some side eye, and I mean, I guess like I guess spoiler, I have Final Fantasy 16 on my top 10 list.
Okay.
Not quite in my top 5, so I mean, it's a game I played and enjoyed as well. And I agree with what you said. Some of the things I liked about it are like the kaiju fights. It is a technical spectacle, like. And there are parts of the storytelling and world building that are quite good. I like the action combat, but I could get into a whole spoiler cast. But to say that I kind of echo that this was a pretty solid game. Like I liked it, even though I know it's had some mixed reception. I think it
Yeah.
was a pretty solid Final Fantasy.
So there we are. William hits number 5.
I'm taking a guess that the side eye was the fact that you were playing a Final Fantasy 16 game.
Well,
Final Fantasy game and liking it.
Yeah, that, and I guess the fact that this one has gotten such a mixed critical reception, maybe from the folks who are traditionalists in terms of the Final Fantasy series.
There are definitely people who like this game though, but yeah, I hear what you're saying of like longtime stalwarts of the series of maybe more mixed.
Right.
Those,
Where's
those
my
people
turn-based
haven't been
combat?
happy in a long time.
Right.
That's true.
True.
They have bigger problems.
Gotcha. But yeah, that's number 5.
All right. Yeah. So Will's number 5, Octopath, or not Octopath, Final Fantasy 16. I was thinking, I was about to make a comment that, the people who are unhappy with this, the longtime people, they should be happy with Octopath. Like, that's the game for them. That's where my head was in that moment.
Got it.
I don't know. I was going to give Will some side eye for suddenly putting Octopath Traveler 2 on his list. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really like JRPGs, but I found this one.
I have not played Final Fantasy 16, but Ben Starr seems like a delightful person, is all I'll say.
There you go.
All right. So moving on, Ryan, what is your number 5 of the year?
My number 5 is Armored Core 6.
Nice.
All right.
I am in the middle of that game as right now, but it is not in my top 5, so I think this one's all you.
And I feel like
All right.
it's one of these few that I definitely wish I would have played before I could put my list together, but I couldn't get to everything.
Mm-hmm. Final Fantasy 16 was one of those for me.
I actually just finished it like last week, so it's one that was kind of it kind of bumped up my list a little bit as I got closer and closer to the ending. So it actually, I felt like I enjoyed it a little bit more as I played through it, which was kind of pushed it into my top 5 and kind of nudged out a couple of other things. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you haven't played Armored Core 6, so it's the latest game from Software. It's kind of a mech. I would describe it as almost like an arcadey type game.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to have more fixed missions, like your mech. When you turn on the boost for your mechs, they do this kind of cool thing where they almost like skate around. And you can kind of, depending on what kind of mech you're driving, you can turn pretty quickly and like lock on pretty snappily. And they have like a whole different weapon loadouts. So you can build mechs that are like tanks. You can build mechs that are kind of like traditional, like 2-leg walker mechs. I was kind of fortunate that I found a build that I liked from pretty early in the game and was able to mostly stick with it. I had to tweak it for some of the super bosses, but I did like what's called a dual trigger build. So I used like an SMG. My mech had an SMG in both hands. And it was like super fast and light, and I would just get on top of the enemy and boost dodge all day long. And I mean, Armored Core, like, I guess aside from what I've said, like, From Software has been kind of on a roll of doing very polished games. A lot of their recent games have been a bit heavier on world design and lore. I feel like Armored Core is maybe a bit more linear and cut and dry, but it still has this very polished look. It has very polished gameplay. It's kind of has a nice actiony feel to that arcade like gameplay where you're kind of like a lot of times engaging like other mechs or like other kind of vehicles or whatever, locking on and kind of using your boost to dodge back and forth. Like it's very snappy, tons of build options, so you can do cool things with that. I guess 2 other things I'll say, and try not to get too spoilery or too detailed or whatever, but I felt like one thing I really liked about this game is that there are a lot of fights with other mechs. And From Software games, I feel like some of their best enemy encounters, especially their boss fights, is when the boss kind of plays by a similar set of rules as your character. And Armored Core just has a ton of that. Like, it feels like a lot of the enemies you fight are just like they went into the mech, the mech loadout builder, put together like a different combination of like guns and plasma weapons or whatever, and like, you're fighting those mechs, and it's kind of like a quote unquote fair fight. So there's just tons of that, I feel like, in Armored Core, and those are lots of fun. They're very satisfying. And then I kind of like the narrative. I mean, it's a very simple kind of, they deliver it mostly through voice lines, and sometimes they'll do clever things with the mission designs, shake things up a little bit in some of the missions, give you maybe like a couple of decisions along the way. Not a ton of story, but it's just very well delivered, like good narration, like kind of tells a story about this world and like this, this quote unquote coral that you hear about in the first couple missions. It's kind of like this resource that everybody's fighting over. So there's kind of like a pretty cool narrative that just kind of goes. And so, at first it was like, oh, okay, cool, like just some voice lines or whatever. But over the course of the story, I was like, okay, I actually like this. Like, I think they've just kind of, it's a straightforward delivery, but they just executed it really well. And, you're kind of, your character's sort of in the center of some of the events. So anyway, yeah, it kind of like, as I rounded it out, I was like, man, that was cool. Like, I had a lot of fun with that. So
yeah, the
Nice.
combat's definitely, in what I've played, the combat's definitely the strength. Like it exactly like you said, like especially when you're fighting other mechs or some of the bigger bosses, like it really shines in those moments. All right. Well, that was Ryan's number 5, was Armored Core 6. Which brings us to my number 5, which is let me clear the throat for this one. Resident Evil 4.
Very nice.
Did
Well done.
I get that right?
Yeah, that
I
was
think
good.
you got it.
All right.
what are you selling?
Does
I
anyone
heard
else
they
have
nerfed the
this?
merchant.
Does anyone have this higher?
Nope.
All right. Yeah, this is the Resident Evil 4 remake, and yes, the merchant is in there. He's still he does not say those phrases as often, but he does say them. If you engage with him long enough, he will deliver the what do you buy in. But yeah, we did do a whole podcast episode on this, so there's a lot more of us, me, Nate, and Will talking about this one. And I feel like I probably came across more negative in that in that podcast we did, because I do really like this game. I don't like it as much as the original, but I still had a lot of fun with this remake. And actually, one of the things I do appreciate about the remake a lot is that it's not a super faithful remake, because I think the original Resident Evil 4 still holds up pretty well today. And like a very faithful remake, I think, would not be like, it would still be cool to like have that game like, look nicer and, take advantage of modern hardware and all that. But I think it actually is more interesting to have something that kind of like remixes it and tweaks it and adds new mechanics. And even if I don't like it as much, it makes it exist as like an alternate version of this game that is one of my favorites. And I like having that alternate version to play. And I still got really into this game. Like when I think of the original, like its best aspects were like just constantly changing up scenarios, just like the pacing, just like it's not a repetitive game. Like you don't get bored of what you're doing, and the remake does that super well also, and like all the different fun weapons, and just it's like an action game that just goes, and like every moment of it is really fun to engage with, and I found that in the remake as well. And some of the changes in the remake I liked as well. For example, it was nice having like the lake area more fleshed out to explore and tinker around in there. And some of the new enemies I thought were pretty worthwhile, like the summoner. Like this is the type of stuff that like makes it, like I've played the original to death, and what this remake does well is like it throws in things that keep me on my toes. So like the new summoner enemy, it's like, oh shoot, like this was not in the original, and I have to approach this fight totally differently. And like having that stuff baked into the other things that make Resident Evil 4 as good as it is, like just made for a really fun experience. And I ended up playing through this remake, I think 3 times through New Game Plus. Which one thing that the remake does better than the original is the New Game Plus features. So it does make it more interesting to do that New Game Plus and take advantage of those perks. And it's still got the camp. It's
Yes.
it's just a fun time.
I definitely feel like that says like a lot about this game in this packed year of really long games, that it is still something that you went and decided to play through multiple times. And like I even played it and really enjoyed it, and immediately upon finishing it was like, I kind of want to do a New Game Plus, and I just set it aside so that I could play something else and didn't end up getting around to it. But like I had that pull too, because it does just feel good to play through, and you want to keep on that treadmill of like, I want to see what will happen if I start the game with all the stuff I had before. And it definitely is a strong one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because well, I won't dive into the details of New Game Plus, but yeah, it is a fun way to play. It goes a lot quicker than the original run.
Right.
But yeah, it's fun. And yeah, you're absolutely right that like wanting to play a game multiple times in this stacked year says a lot. And even like what I said about like the pacing and stuff, like it also sticks out still in 2023, like just how good the pacing and variety in that game is, and how so many games stretch out by kind of repeating a lot of stuff, and like that game has almost nothing repeated. Like
Yeah.
it's like every encounter is different. It's wild. And yeah, like and there were a lot of really good remakes this year, and I think, and this is the highest one on my list, and I think what does make it stand out to me is that it's not a faithful remake. Like I think by like doing changes, I think makes it pretty cool. All right, so that was my number 5 was Resident Evil 4 Remake. We actually went a full round without anything getting delayed. That's impressive. All right, so now we're on to the number 4s. Nate, what is your number 4 game of the year?
My number 4 game for this year is Sea of Stars, which we also had a lengthy separate discussion about.
Yes, we also had a discussion about this. I do not have it higher. Do you, Ryan?
I'm giving Nate the side eye here.
This game is on my top 10, just not in my top 5.
Yeah, I'm half joking. If you happen to listen to our spoilercast, you might know that I was a little bit down on it, and it did not make my top 10.
Yeah.
So tell us, Nate, why it's so high for you this year.
Yeah, this is one that it is kind of a throwback RPG in the style of a Chrono Trigger Mario RPG, borrowing a lot from those different games. It definitely worked for me most of the time. I'm not going to say that I don't have any issues with it, but I found it to be a very enjoyable, lighthearted, good time engaging with its different characters that have very distinctive abilities that all like work together, and the systems that they kind of overlay on the basic turn-based combat with timing elements from a Mario RPG style. The systems they lay on top of that to encourage you to use abilities in specific orders and think a lot about turn order, and using all of the party members that you have available was really fun, especially in the biggest like boss fight situations that the game throws at you. I found that really satisfying and rewarding a lot of the time. And then on top of that, like I think it's just like a really pretty pleasing game. Like aesthetically, visually, in terms of music and everything. I think the characters are really well rendered and written to be very endearing, most of them. Um, and I just had a fun time with it. It was one that, like, when I sat down to play it, I knew I was going to, like, make progress in this game and have a fun combat encounter somewhere during my playtime with it, and, like, um get some, like, positive feedback from it, basically, no matter what, because it was just like a smooth, um fun time for me.
Yeah, no, I like this game a lot too.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's on my top 10, just not in the top 5. And yeah, like I think the presentation's really great. I think it looks great, and I think the combat mechanics, like you said, I think are fun, especially in the boss fights, which we talked about in our dedicated episode. But yeah, I think it's like a game that just it kind of you would think this would be easy to do, but I think it's actually hard to capture that older style of JRPG and do it well. And I think Sea of Stars, even if it's not perfect, I think it does it well. Like, I think it's a good game of that type. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I did a pretty much completionist playthrough of it, and I wouldn't have done that if I didn't like it as much as I did. Like, I think it's a good game.
Yeah. No, I think it is worth checking out for anybody interested in that style of RPG, for sure. And like I said, I had, some minor quibbles with it that we talked about in our separate episode, but I definitely feel like those are just kind of like bumps on an otherwise very, like, solid package. Nothing that really threw me off of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And a really killer soundtrack too.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, Sea of Stars, it's good.
Yep. All right, that was Nate's number 4, Sea of Stars. And moving on, Will, what is your number 4?
My number 4 game is Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
All right.
And
does anyone have that higher, first of all? Nope. All right, this is all you, Will.
Yeah, so this came out in October. Insomniac Games, who unfortunately had this ridiculous data breach recently. If you guys have seen that in the news. But I played the other 2 Spider-Man games that they did, the Marvel Spider-Man and then the Miles Morales kind of offshoot. And one, it's still really fun to swing through the city as Spider-Man on your webs. And, kind of building up speed that same way, kind of swinging around buildings. There are a couple of extra traversal options that you get this time. Like, there's like this wingsuit that you have that you can use, which I never really, I don't know. To me, I mean, the wingsuit was nice, and there were times where there are these little, what do you call them? Like wind circles on the map where
like little wind tunnels between buildings. Yeah.
And like, if you really need to go a long way quickly, then, you could deploy your wingsuit and then fly through those little things, and you catch speed every time you go through one of these things. But at the same time, the fast travel is so fast in that game that, like, most of the time, if I was tempted to use my goofy wings, I would just fast travel, because as is probably, you can actually fast travel to specific spots on the map, like every part of the map. Once you reach a certain level within that district, like once you've done enough crap in that district, you basically gain the ability to fast travel anywhere in that district that you want to, like to the street, which is pretty wild, and it's instantaneous, which is sort of, PlayStation 5. Look at my big muscles. You know what I mean? But I think some of the things that I dug about that game is, the little stealth sections that were kind of annoying in one with MJ or whatever. Those are a lot better. MJ now has like a little taser. And some people have said that, like, is MJ more powerful than Spider-Man because she has this taser? Because she really could do some damage with this thing. Like, she can like one shot all these enemies that like Spider-Man has to beat up for a couple for a while,
Yep.
and so that's
I saw a really funny meme at one point
mm,
of it's the scene from one of the Lord of the Rings where Gollum is like debating letting the spider take out
mhm.
Frodo and Sam, and he's like, "We should let her do it," and is like that overlaid with like the Spider-Man talking about like taking on a
Yeah,
villain, and it's like, "Oh, we should let Mary Jane,"
yeah,
she's
exactly.
just so powerful.
Yeah, go get that taser gun and do some work, So those sections were cooler. I think one of the things I like the most about it is really this like ability that you have to create your own slack line. There's a picture, and I don't know that I have access to it here to share in the channel, but I created a slack line, and then I probably strung up something like 10 or 11 enemies on the same slack line. But in the first game and the Miles Morales game, like you can't, you jump to a perch, and then if someone walks underneath it, or you can draw them to it, or they're just posted underneath it, then you can web them up. But then when you gain the ability to create your own sort of slack line from one place to another, you can kind of stay in stealth so much easier. And it gives you a lot of cool options when you run into these different types of encounters, which I love because I'm kind of a little bit of a stealth nut. So, I was all about like taking out these henchman bases and trying to find ways that I could use the slack lines to do it without getting detected. Um, but to me, the coolest thing about the game in a lot of ways is what I guess I would call, and I don't even think this is a term, but like ludonarrative harmony, maybe? Maybe that's what you want to call it. I don't know, but I'm not sure if you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you look at the front of the game, you see that, at some point or another, Peter begins to get the use of the symbiote, the Venom symbiote. And the game, like, does a lot to make that feel amazing. Like all of the powers that you have, like the impact that they have, like the different things you can like slam into the ground and knock guys up. You can like grab dudes and like it'll do this sort of slow mo, like just slap slam down into the ground. Like you feel super strong as Venom, and one of the things that Venom is good about in the game is sort of making it so like, hey, we make a good team. You don't want to get rid of me, do you? And so in the game, as my character is feeling that sort of pull, like, oh my God, well, I should get rid of the suit. The suit's a little bit out of control, but man, it's making me such a better Spider-Man. I'm really digging this. This is awesome. And so I really appreciated the way that I felt it in the same way that Peter did. I was like, man, I don't really want to give this up. This is awesome. Like, I'm loving this power fantasy of being Venom and just destroying people, So I don't know. I thought that was a really clever, I think it's tough sometimes to kind of balance that out right to where you feel as the player kind of the same pull that like I don't want to get rid of this, that your own character feels, and that's a major tension in the game. Is like, is Peter going to give up the suit? How does he give up the suit? Can he give up the suit? Or the symbiote, I guess you would say. But yeah, so overall, I would say that like the overall arc of the story wasn't as touching as the first game, but there were aspects of it, kind of like this whole ludonarrative harmony thing that I'm talking about, that I think were really well done, and I'm certainly excited to see, what other stuff that, well, I guess I can't really say I'm excited to see what they're going to do because, if they follow their game plan, I know exactly what they're going to do next.
That's all out there now.
Yeah, but anyway, my number 4 was Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I don't know if anyone else had a chance to play that, or if anyone had any thoughts on that. But
yeah, I have played it, and I like a lot about it. I think it, in a lot of ways, you talked about Final Fantasy 16 being like a technical marvel, so I think Spider-Man 2 is too, in a slightly different way. It looks and plays so great, and is a meaningful improvement on those previous games, which I also really liked. For me personally, like the story side of Spider-Man 2 fell pretty short, which is why it's not on my list at this point. But it is a very, very strong game.
yeah, and I do think that one aspect of the story was more interesting to me than maybe the arc and the beats as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
They introduced Craven, and Craven serves as a good way to get extra Spidey villains into the mix.
Uh-huh.
But like they do a big, they build him up to seem like this amazing dude. But then like he gets dropped like a bad habit, like really, really quickly. And then the game's like, all right, on to the next. And you're like, really? That was it? Okay. But yeah, so I can see where you're saying that the story did fall short in some ways.
Yeah, but it is really cool, and I did have many times where I finished a base of enemies or an encounter with just like a million of those web lines, just like around the whole environment with just guys strung up everywhere, and that was pretty funny.
Yeah, just go straight Shelob on them.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. All right. So sorry, I've gone over my time.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, so that was Will's number 4 is Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, what is your number 4 game of the year?
So my number 4 was Fire Emblem Engage.
Nice. I believe that is all you. I do not have that higher.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised. I guess, yeah, so I will maybe start off with saying I know that this game has had some mixed reception, and it does have, and I agree that it has some issues with its, in particular with kind of its main story and storytelling, which is kind of interesting because like it's sort of like this 30th anniversary celebration of Fire Emblem, and like I actually felt like it wasn't because it was like too fan servicey or cringy that I had issues with the story. It was just because the villains and the storytelling, like and the presentation, just kind of fell flat and didn't focus on interesting things. But
it's very one-dimensional, let's say.
Yeah, the storytelling,
just very cartoony villains type thing.
Yeah, it kind of misses on some of its potential or some potential to, but anyway. All that said though, this in terms of gameplay, well, so first off, there are some things I do like about the presentation and the story. Like I think the presentation of this game, it looks amazing. I think the voice acting is great. And I still think the support conversations tend to be kind of a highlight for me. Characters like Ivy and Yunaka and maybe to a lesser extent like Panette and Louis. They just had some like great support conversations that usually kind of made me like smile or chuckle. But also like in terms of the gameplay, like it's kind of impressive just how much I guess its intelligent systems continues to like revise the Fire Emblem formula in ways that make it feel like a Fire Emblem game, but then they like change it so much it's like almost it's very much a fundamentally different game. So like with Awakening they did pair ups, and then in Fates they kind of changed the way that mechanic works, and then in Three Houses you had battalions and other things, and in Engage you have the emblem rings, and that creates this kind of really interesting dynamic where like there's this in addition to sort of the familiar strategy RPG gameplay of a Fire Emblem game and things like equipment, you're also trying to pair your units with the emblem rings, which are based on previous Fire Emblem characters, and oftentimes will grant your the equipped character like a subset of abilities inspired by the emblem. So the emblem rings represent kind of earlier Fire Emblem characters, and when you equip those to your units, that unit will gain access to like abilities inspired by like that earlier Fire Emblem characters like game or their personal abilities. So like if you have Thorin's emblem ring equipped to a character, they'll gain things like the debuff skill, or like the ability to sort of do like this draconic vein thing where they change the terrain around them. And so there's all these different combinations you can kind of create and like pair your units with these different emblems, sometimes to learn skills, but also like a lot of times just to like, hey, like I want to give my, my dancer the ability to like, give everybody like a turn using Byleth, or I want my cavalry unit to be paired with Sigurd, who gives them like crazy high movement and like, the Canto ability and all this other stuff. Like, it just creates some really, really fun gameplay where, you can, kind of, and it's also kind of like in terms of the whole like celebration of Fire Emblem, it's really clever because a lot of the emblem rings have gameplay mechanics inspired by previous games. So like, the examples I mentioned, like Sigurd, he's like, I guess a mounted unit. And so he gives all these mounted bonuses to whoever he's equipped to. So it's just really clever the way that they pair those, and it made like the emblem rings in particular made, I felt like that, a really fun like dynamic for that game.
Yeah, the emblem rings are definitely where the like celebrating its history is pretty apparent. And it was cool to see all those. It's basically like one emblem ring per main character of each previous Fire Emblem game. And then at the end of the game, you get like all of these characters standing around together. And it's like, oh, okay, here's like all the Fire Emblems, all the blue-haired sword wielders standing next to each other.
Yeah, yeah. It surprisingly, like, despite all the fan service, like that part of it surprisingly didn't have me like cringing. Some of the support conversations, it's like, why do we need to have support conversations with like old Fire Emblem characters? That was kind of weird. But yeah, like they kind of, it was kind of cool to like see this like, this sort of like anniversary collection of all these different heroes or protagonists together.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with this. I played this game as well, and I did enjoy it. I just want to shout out probably my favorite thing about the game, which was the break system. So Fire Emblem's long had the weapon triangle, and now I feel like they've made it mean a lot more. So if you, let's say, attack an axe wielder with your sword, because sword beats axes, you actually will like prevent them from counterattacking. That's how it worked, right?
Yeah, it's like they, for like one action or one attack, they would lose their ability to counterattack.
Yeah. So I thought that was really clever, and like, because in past games you've kind of been able to just brute force through the through the weapon triangle if your unit was strong enough. It didn't really matter, but this like makes it really important. So it's like, okay, I can attack an axe wielder with my sword. I break them, they can't counterattack, and then I can have someone else go in, like maybe a mage or someone weaker who I wouldn't want them to counterattack, and they just get like a free hit. So it like makes it really, it puts a bigger premium on that unit positioning and attacking the right units with the right units. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's another one of those little like tweaks. It's like very meaningful, and it's very recognizable. But it's like, uh, you almost don't even think about it. Like it's kind of subtle the way they've mixed and remixed some of those mechanics.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't get into the story of this game at all, but the actual like tactical combat was still really good, and they made some fun changes, like you mentioned. All right, so that was Ryan's number 4, was Fire Emblem Engage, and that brings us to my number 4, which is a game we're not going to talk about yet. It is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, we'll save that one.
Yes, we will. So now we'll wrap around to the number 3s. So Nate, what's your number 3?
Oh, my number 3 is Pikmin 4.
And we're also going to talk about that one later.
All right.
So Will, what is your number 3?
It's another one we're going to talk about later.
All
It's
right.
called Baldur's Gate 3.
All right, let's just keep on churning through these. All right, Ryan, we're back up to you again already.
Mine is
What's your
also
number three,
Baldur's
Ryan?
Gate. Mine
I'm
is
sorry.
also Baldur's Gate 3.
All right.
Same as
All
Will's.
right.
All right.
Keep it
So
rolling.
number threes are pretty easy so far. I think my number three is going to be a unique one though, unless someone else played this and I didn't know about it. But my number three is going to be Chants of Sennaar.
That's all you, baby.
All right. Yeah, I really liked this game, obviously, and it kind of surprised me a little bit. Like, I had a feeling I'd like it, but as much as I did, it caught me off guard a little bit. And I think a lot of that comes down to... I'm sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, I think I've seen a little bit about this game. And if I understand correctly, and I guess maybe you'll explain this, but like, it's almost like a puzzle game where you're trying to match languages or like pictograms or something like that.
Yeah, so you're trying
Yeah.
to decipher these... It's like an adventure game, like... I mean, I guess you could think of it in like an adventure, point-and-click type adventure game, but it's not really the type of game you think of in that way, but you interact with it kind of in that way, but the main hook is, yes, to decipher languages, and all the languages are presented with these symbols, and you're trying to figure out what all of these mean and piece it together. And I mean, first of all, that process to me was really fun. Like, there end up being 5 languages in the game, and you kind of go through them one at a time for the most part. Though later in the game, they kind of start mixing and matching, and you actually have to translate between languages, which was a really good like late game thing to have to do. Because early game, you're just deciphering a language. So like, I thought that was a really good way to shake it up later, is then you have to start translating between languages. But it was really interesting just to like, just to puzzle through that of like contextually, like, oh, as you're talking to people or reading signs, like trying to pick up from context clues what things mean. So like a tutorial puzzle is like, oh, there's a lever and there's like a symbol at the top and a symbol at the bottom. You pull the lever up, the door opens, you pull it down, the door closes. So, okay, that's your open and close symbols. That's like the very first tutorial puzzle in the game. Obviously, it gets a lot more intricate than that, but that kind of problem, like puzzle solving, worked really well for me. And it's also just like a really interesting like dissection of language, because you go through 5 languages and each one has different rules. So like how they negate words is different, how they make words plural is different, like their sentence structure is different, like where they place nouns or like subject and objects and verbs, like how they arrange their sentence structure. Like, it really gets you to think about languages in really interesting ways that worked for me and made learning each language like a different process. Because I think if it was just stuck with one language for the whole game, and this is like a 10-ish hour game, so it's not super long, but even with that, I think if it had stuck with one language the whole game, that probably would have gotten old. But I think it really smartly, by having 5 languages, each with different syntactical rules, and then later game you start switching between them. I think it's just a really nice ramp and worked really well. And then on top of that, I think just everything around the game supports the idea of like it's a game about communication, which makes sense. You're deciphering languages, but also the narrative hooks in the game are also about communication. And I think it like works really well as you start piecing everything together towards the end of the game. And it's just like a really cohesive thing that just was like just really striking in the end. And like the art style is really good. I really love the way the game looks. And all of the different areas in the game have a very distinct art style, and very like striking personality to each zone. The music's really great. I liked how the story wrapped up. It's one of these games that like I played it and just every aspect just felt like it fed into like the same theme and just worked really well. And the puzzles themselves I thought were just like, I say puzzles, but I mean you're deciphering a language. So like I thought that whole hook was really fun and really unique. Like I don't think I've played anything like this before, and just I don't know. It just feel like everything about it was pulled off really well.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
I've heard good things about this game for sure, and I definitely want to get to it.
Yeah, I think where I saw it was like a GMTK video where Mark Brown was, I think he was mostly focusing on like the mechanics or whatever, going through a few examples, but it kind of looked pretty cool.
Yeah, I saw that video as well. He did a good job kind of breaking it down a little bit. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And also, if you want a shorter game to play from the year, it's also a good one for that. Um, so that was my number 3 was Chants of Sennaar. And now we're up to the number 2s. So Nate, what is your number 2 game of the year?
Speaking of good short puzzle games, my number 2 game of the year is Cocoon.
Nice. That was my number 6, just off the top 5. But yeah, what'd you like so much about Cocoon?
So Cocoon is a sort of top-down adventure puzzle game, where you're exploring a world or multiple worlds, depending on how you're looking at it. And are just constantly presented with little puzzles for how to progress to the next area. And primarily, the main thing you're doing to solve those puzzles is moving little colored orbs around the environment and placing them into different devices, or using some innate ability of that specific orb, to progress in some way. And you get a couple different orbs throughout the game that kind of have different properties, but the big hook for it is that each of the orbs that you carry around and use to solve puzzles is also contains a world within it that you can jump in and out of. And so you have this kind of multi-layered world where you're jumping into and out of different environments that have different puzzles presented to you, and making progress where you can. And then where it starts to really kind of wind in on itself is when you start picking up one orb and taking it inside of another orb's world to solve puzzles and mix and match things in different ways as you get access to more of these throughout the game. So of course it starts pretty simple where you only really have one orb, so you're kind of jumping in and out of that one to make progress or using it to activate things. And then you get a second one and kind of going back and forth between those, or bringing one into the other to solve puzzles, to make progress. And then that just keeps compounding throughout a pretty short experience that just keeps ratcheting up what it's asking you to think about in terms of, like, what do I have available to me right now? How am I going to figure out this seemingly unsolvable puzzle in front of me? Like, I can kind of tell what I need to do, but it seems impossible. And then you like have to rearrange and think through like a couple layers of cause and effect of how things are gonna stack up the chain of interdimensional travel. And it never failed to make me think, this is a really hard puzzle and I don't know how to solve it, and then make me feel like an absolute genius when I figured it out, which is a pretty good feeling. I had a couple of times in this game, and I usually am not super like strict about not looking things up for games. Like if I get stuck on something, I'll just look stuff up. But with this game, I really wanted to figure it all out because it was so cool. So I definitely had times where I would like bang my head against something for 30 minutes, not being able to see any way through, turn off the game, and then come back to it the next day and be like, aha, I've got it. Eureka. And that was always fun. So this is like one of the best puzzle games I've played in a while, I feel like. just in terms of asking me to use my brain in a new and different way, and really challenge and reward me for doing that.
Yeah, no, Cocoon is freaking rad. Like I'm glad we got to talk about it because yeah, it was just outside my top 5, but which is kind of a sign of how good this year was. It was like this game's really good. It's a really, I mean, all the things you said. I think it's a really like tightly made game too. Like everything in it feels so intentional. And yeah, that whole mechanic of like taking those little worlds inside other worlds, like the way that affects like the way you think about solving problems is just, it's so smart, and they're able to get so much mileage out of like that kind of simple mechanic. And it's just cool.
So cool. And
It's
you
really
feel
good.
cool every time you figure something out.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe like just how cool that mechanic is, and like the
Yeah.
look and sound design of the game also feed into that. Like everything about this game just like is really well done. Um, yeah, Cocoon's great.
Yeah, Cocoon is awesome.
All right, so that was Nate's number 2. Is that where we're at?
Yep, we're on 2s.
All right, kind of skip the 3s pretty quickly. All right, Nate's number 2, Cocoon. That game's awesome. Will, what is your number 2?
Well, in my opinion, it's a pretty awesome game too. It's called Wild Hearts, and it came out in February. And it was developed
Hold
by
up. Does anyone have this game higher?
Nobody has this game.
You never know. All right, sorry, continue.
Objection.
Okay. Do you have it higher, Ryan?
No, I'm totally just messing.
Okay, so Wild Hearts. I guess it was around the time that Monster Hunter World came out. I was convinced by some friends to pick this thing up, and Monster Hunter World was a little bit, it was a little bit clunky to me, and then I got into Rise, and it sort of streamlined everything. But then when I got into Wild Hearts, I was like, this seems like it's sort of doing that same sort of thing. But it really did kind of throw a curveball. So when I first started playing it, I was just kind of like, like why do we need this game? I'm like, we already have Monster Hunter, and there's a lot of it. So why do we need you, Wild Hearts? And it was insisting that I use its Karakuri system, and I was very reluctant initially. I was like, what is this? So essentially, your character can get this thread either in the environment or from the monsters that you're fighting themselves, and you can build little contraptions in the middle of the fight with that stuff. So you can build a box that you might be able to jump and shoot from on top of, or jump off of and do something to kind of mount the monster. Or you can build like a little spring. And these things can get very, very complicated. I mean, to where you like basically will build, like you could build like a spring and then a box and then a spring on top of it. And then that whole thing transform into another object completely. So, there's one of them where there's this giant spring that like slings a rock down on top of the monster, and so that's one thing you can get. There's one that like shoots a flying monster with like a harpoon and like pulls them down to the ground. There are tons of these things, and you can sort of you get some of them in a tree, but there are other ones that you have to actually unlock through being inspired in the fight. So you might be fighting like this chicken, and all of a sudden your character's like, I've got an idea, and then it'll like guide you through how to create it the first time, and so you'll create this like harpoon that like nails the chicken and pulls him down to the earth or something like that. And from that point on, you can kind of use it whenever you want to. But initially, I was very reluctant to use the Karakuri because I was just in my own zone, playing these games the way I was used to. But by the end, I was like using these Karakuri to do everything. Of course, over the course of a fight, they become less effective. So you can't, like, if there's one that you have that pins an enemy in place, it'll pin it for less and less time until, after you've used it like 3 times, it won't pin them very long at all. They'll just break right out of it. So you can't like abuse them, but you can choose specific times to use them that are really helpful. And it's really adds a new layer to the whole monster hunting thing. I know there are a lot of really cool things that were kind of done in the game. One is I remember I used the cannon as my weapon of choice, and there's a certain rhythm that you get in as a cannon user. So, and this will sound so convoluted, but there's a little heat meter that you get as you shoot cannon shots. And it's not a cannon in like the pirate sense. It's just sort of like shoots energy balls or something like that. So you shoot these balls until you get the meter up into like almost to where it's overheating. Then you shoot like a grenade that makes a little spot on the ground, but only if it hits the monster. Then you can suck that pool up that it makes and then shoot like a laser at the monster. And you could look up a YouTube video of how it does this, but it's a really complicated but interesting rhythm that you get into, and it takes a while to kind of nail it down. But then you're trying to kind of come up with like ways that, well, because it's kind of involved, you want to have to try to figure out, well, when can I get the shots off that I need to get as much DPS as I can in the windows that I can get it in. So that's something that's pretty cool about the game. I've shared a graphic up in our podcast chat of what one of the weapon skill trees looks like. And that's the cannon tree that I've shared up there. And unfortunately, listeners wouldn't be able to have the benefit of seeing this, but you can kind of start at any of those top points, and then you can kind of draw your I guess tree any way you want to. So you can kind of draw it down. You can draw it down the middle and then back up towards the top again, and then down again and then back up towards the top. Or you can draw it all the way down the right hand side and then move all the way over to the left hand side. Something like that. And every time you upgrade, there are certain skills that you can take with you. So for instance, let's say you want to up your critical damage. There might be 2 or 3 different nodes that can do that, and you want to draw a path that goes through those particular nodes and then carry that critical with you. So you might be able to take, you might have 4 different critical damage boosters that you've kind of accumulated as you draw a path through your skill tree. And so the weapon upgrade system was, to me, just absolutely ingenious. And I thought, and there's a whole lot you can kind of do with it, depending on how you want to really approach the fights. A couple of the things I'll kind of mention while I'm here. The health is pretty amazing. You don't have to worry about potions that you can just pick up. They're just plants everywhere. Not everywhere, but from time to time, there'll just be a plant, and you pick it up, and that might give you 3 uses of a heal, which is kind of nice to not have to worry about the healing potion thing, which is always something you got to deal with in Monster Hunter. You're like, farming honey and stuff like that, so you can make that happen. But the last thing, I guess, is the monster design. I think is pretty great. There's not as many monsters as there is in Monster Hunter, but all the monsters have they're sort of this interesting meld of flora and fauna. So you might fight like a wolf that has vines coming out of his tail or something like that, or a rat that has a fruit in its tail or something like that. They're like these interesting sort of mergers of sort of the natural world and actual animals. But yeah, I loved Wild Hearts, and I think anybody who has, if you like Monster Hunter at all and you have someone to play it with, because these things are always more fun with more people, dive into it.
Did you end up playing multiplayer? Or?
Oh yeah, I only played multiplayer. So yeah, I had me and 2 other guys. I think this was Sneed and Tim with me on this one, and yeah, we had a good time with it. It's like that. Once I kind of embraced the differences, as opposed to sort of thumbing my nose at them, then it really sort of came to life for me.
Yeah, it seems like a really cool game that I kind of wish I had played and still may get around to at some point. I like when you were talking about the intricacies of the cannon weapon that you used. I just love that the style of game has that level of complexity to all the different build options available to you. It's like you're playing a fighting game and you're trying to learn your character's combos and when to use them strategically. It's in a completely different setting. It's a neat thing that it's cool
Yeah,
that they like hit that same feeling that the Monster Hunter games have, and I really also do just like generally the idea that we might be entering a world where more developers take a stab at the Monster Hunter style and do their own take on it, because I think that would be cool.
Yeah, there's a little spring that you can bounce off of, and if you shoot your cannon while you're in the air, then it accumulates more heat than it would if you're just shooting from the
Go
ground.
on.
Yeah,
So
this all sounds
essentially,
great.
it benefits you. Like towards the end, I was like dropping this little spring that I can bounce off of to overheat my gun quicker, so I could shoot the grenade shot quicker and then get the laser cannon quicker. And I was like, there's just all kinds of little tricks like that the game sort of supports. That's super cool. Like you're saying,
That's
but
cool stuff.
anyway, I've probably gone way over. But Wild Hearts is super cool. So
Yeah, no,
anyway.
that does. This is one of the like 10 games that I did not get to this year, but I would like to play. So, as we talked about early on, not being able to get to everything, this game definitely seems cool.
Yeah, man. Well, that's my 2.
Very nice, very nice. That's awesome. All right, so Will's number 2, Wild Hearts. Ryan, what is your number 2 game of the year?
My number 2 is Rune Factory 3 Special.
All right, what did you?
I assume nobody.
Wait a
else has
minute
that.
there, Ryan, because I've got... No, sorry, can't.
All right, so what made this year such a top game of the year?
Yeah, so Rune Factory 3 Special, I think it's a light remake of, I think Rune Factory 3 was a DS game. So they did kind of a light remake of it that released this year. And yeah, I guess I don't have a long history with the Rune Factory series necessarily, but I first played Rune Factory 4 Special last year, and I've kind of been a fan of the series ever since. So if you're not familiar with what Rune Factory is, it's kind of actually funny, because in Harvest Moon's development, I think the studios actually split. And one of the teams I think some of the original developers kind of split off and started doing the Rune Factory games. So it has that farm sim core that's like a Harvest Moon, but what they chose to do is build on like an ARPG layer with like some crafting systems and things like that. So part of the reason I mentioned 4 is because these games do follow a pattern. So like I've played 4, 5, and now I guess 3, and they have a lot of similarities and a lot in common. It's not too surprising, but I've found this game, this series, to be kind of like very charming, for a few reasons. Like, I think a big part of it is that I kind of like action RPGs, sort of in general, but I also really like whenever developers kind of find ways to layer them in, sometimes with other systems. So if you think of games like Sakana of Rice and Ruin, or like some of the adventure elements in Stardew Valley, or like some survival games have like action RPG elements. Like I think it's really cool to have that kind of dynamic of both like a sim gameplay layer and an ARPG gameplay layer. And it's decent. I mean, it can be a bit clunky in Rune Factory, but it's kind of cool to have those two separate gameplay layers. Like, and sometimes they work together, right? Like, your adventuring maybe helps you get materials or get some resources, and like your farming might help you get like some basic stats or some money, or and so you kind of play the game with these two systems, like a lot of times in parallel, helping each other. I think that's one thing I really like about the series kind of in general. But another thing I like specifically about Rune Factory is that I think they just have really good character writing in their like friendship stories, and kind of like relationship stories. So a big part of these kind of Harvest Moon style games and like games like Stardew Valley is a lot of times, you're starting out from scratch in like a lot of times a new small town or whatever. And so part of the goal, or what you often want to do is kind of like befriend the townsfolk, right? And you get to kind of see their stories. And the Rune Factory games kind of have this like anime aesthetic. And a lot of times you'll choose someone to marry. There's kind of like the dating aspect of that. But I think these games do have some very charming writing. And in 3 in particular, like a lot of times, like with the people you befriend, like as you progress through their stories, like a lot of times they'll have family members in the community. So while you're seeing like one person's story, sometimes like it'll connect it in with like they'll have like their somebody's mom or sister or brother or whatever will be a part of the little story event. So I thought, in relative to some other games like a Stardew Valley or whatever, like thought that Rune Factory 3 had some pretty cool little character stories, and like a lot of times they're pretty charming. So yeah, I kind of am a fan of this series, but I also enjoyed playing this game specifically this year. I guess the only other thing I'll say is that 3, this is a remake of 3, which is a little bit different, like simpler in some ways than 4 and 5, the more recent Rune Factory games. And that was also kind of an interesting, like as somebody who's now played a few of these games, like it was also just interesting to see like an earlier iteration of the game or of the franchise.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think this is, being so high on your list, if you think this is one of the better ones, or if a lot of them are kind of in, you like them similarly, or I'm asking this as someone who knows very little about this franchise.
Yeah, that's funny. It's kind of tough, and I've kicked this around a bit myself because I think I got the most into 4, but it would be hard to recommend in some ways just because like it's kind of a longer and more complicated game. And like 5 has more quality of life features, but it loses a little bit of the polish I feel like that 4 has. And then 3 is like sort of an earlier game, so it's a little bit simpler overall, which is both like it's a positive in some ways in that it's more accessible, but then it's also like it has the systems are just a little bit less like have a little less meat on the bone to play around with. So I have a hard time. Like I think 4 was my personal favorite, but if I was recommending one, I would probably say like 3 or 5 would be easier to get into.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, that's cool. So Ryan's number 3 was Rune Factory 3 Special, or number 2. Sorry,
Number 2. Yep.
Yep. I'm on top of things. All right, which brings us to my number 2, which is a game that already came up, and that is Pikmin 4. Which when I first made my list, it was actually a few spots lower, and then I kept staring at it and like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, you're right. Pikmin 4 is awesome.
Pikmin 4 is great. Yeah, I always, whenever I'm making my list, I like visualize them and like just see how it feels. And like I kept making new revisions, and every time I revise it, Pikmin 4 would move up. But yeah, Pikmin 4 is great. Like, I mean, I've been a fan of Pikmin since the beginning. Like, I've really liked all these games. And for a while, I wasn't that into Pikmin 4 because I feel like it starts kind of slow, and that's like the one negative thing I have to say about Pikmin 4. But like, once it gets going, especially like the back half of the game, it's Pikmin like firing on all cylinders. Like the last handful of areas, once you have like a handful of Pikmin unlocked and like you've really been introduced to all the different mechanics and like how the caves work and like the Dandori challenges, and you've gotten a handful of upgrades because this game introduces some persistent upgrade systems, and like you build out your base a little bit. Like once it really gets going, it's such a great like mix of ideas, like still built around the core of what has always made Pikmin good, but they've kind of fleshed it out a little more in ways that work. And it feels like in a lot of ways, like I think the main thing when I think about Pikmin 4 is it's like it feels like a like best of collection of everything that's been in Pikmin before. Like this feels like the most Pikmin. Like um Pikmin 2 is my previous favorite because I just thought the puzzle design and the caves and everything was really strong, and like I think Pikmin 4 does all that stuff well. Pikmin 3 is where the series I would say got really streamlined, and I think Pikmin 4 does that just as well. Like it's really every time I finished a day, like my first thought was like, all right, I want to do one more day. It's just like it's just like streamlined to so well in that way.
Yeah, for me, like when I think about, and this is pretty much what you were just saying too, I think like I feel like Pikmin 4 of all the games I played this year is like the best game that is a sequel to games I already liked, and everything they changed or tweaked or added made me like it even more. It's like they did all the things that I like about Pikmin, and then everything that they changed or added was a positive to me. So like it's just like a really amazing sequel.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, they added plenty of new things too. Like, Ochi's new, the Dandori stuff's all new. They like all of the persistent upgrades and base stuff I mentioned, like all that's new. So it's like they added new stuff too. It's not just more refined Pikmin. It's that and new stuff. And like you said, pretty much all the new stuff is really good. They even like have a bonus mode in the late game that is just straight up Pikmin 1 crammed inside of Pikmin 4. It's just like, all right, here's a limited day challenge to collect a certain number of parts, and you only have the original red, blue, and yellow Pikmin. And it's really good. Like that was actually one of my favorite things in the game was like, all right, here's like a more like intense timed challenge. And it's like, so it's like anything that's ever been good in Pikmin before is here. And it's done really well. And yeah, like I did everything in this game. Like I feel like this game got better as it went. I did all of the post game credit stuff, and as we've talked about, like in a year of really long games, like this is like in addition to my number one, like this is the game that I felt like I could have just kept playing. Like this game could have been twice as long, and I would have happily played it for twice as long. It was just like everything about it was just hitting. It was just like always a pleasure to play. And it's very charming and looks very good.
Yep.
As well. Yeah, I know Nate and Will, you both played this as well. So anything you wanna speak to on Pikmin 4?
I mean, it was a good game to just kind of chill and kind of delegate, I don't know, I like to just walk around and be like, all right, I've got about 70 of these dudes. Let's see, let's have these guys do this, and 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 then, they would just, it would feel like that was one of these things that sort of like intrinsically feels good. When you can like, it's like killing two birds with one stone, like that always feels great. Pikmin kind of like gives you that feeling often, you're like, all right, well, I'm doing this while I'm doing this while I'm doing this. And sometimes that you'd really feel like you were like getting a lot accomplished. And, I was big on like getting those percentages to 100% and some of those zones. I'm like, let's get it to 100, let's kick it up a notch. Let's, if I was stuck at 80 or something. I mean, there were a couple, like I wasn't, I don't know if I have quite the illustrious history with the series. I mean, I played whatever co-op modes existed with you, I think, in the past, but I never really played any of the single player stuff. And so some of those challenges, those post-credits challenges, really, I just kind of, I kind of tapped out at that point because I didn't have the patience or the skill, I guess, but I still enjoyed what I played quite a bit, and it did make my list, although it didn't make my top 5.
Only thing I'll add is that Ochi is great.
He is. Ochi for president, 2024.
Ochi for president, yeah.
Ochi is quite incredible. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is there's still not really anything quite like Pikmin. Like, sometimes games like Tinykin last year gets compared to it, but like that's still like a different thing. Like the specific type of like puzzle solving that Pikmin has, or strategy, whatever you want to call it. It's nothing quite like it, and I think it is very good. All right, so that was my number two, Pikmin 4, and that brings us to this last round here, where we'll talk about our number ones, our favorite games of the year. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Nate and Ryan, I think you have the same number one, and we'll start there. So Nate, what is your number one game of the year?
It is that Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
And then
Got
Ryan,
it.
is that also your number one?
That is my number one as well.
All
Nice.
right, so yeah, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. What made it both of your number ones? Whoever wants to go.
I mean, like it's pretty obvious gonna be my number one this year because I'm such a Zelda fan. But um, I mean, Tears of the Kingdom is
I mean, what didn't it do? You know what I mean?
it's like good and bad that it follows up probably my favorite game ever, which is Breath of the Wild, and then also tries to change a lot from that game. So it's not like I necessarily love 100% of what it is doing, but I respect it so much, and still had just a great time exploring that world and playing with things and just getting lost in the either physically in the world or just like in the systems, getting lost in ideas and playing with things. This is definitely that game for me this year. Just like poking at and running around with and being sometimes intentional and trying to complete objectives, and sometimes just being able to turn that off and be mindless and just engage with the gamey systems and play and see what happens and be surprised. This is that for me.
Yeah, I guess for me, like Tears of the Kingdom, like I'm well, no, I'm not gonna say that, but I did like it better than Breath of the Wild. I guess I'm not gonna put a stake in the ground and say, well, it's just Breath of the Wild but better. I know some people will take umbrage with that, and understandably so. But I guess for me, like we've talked on spoiler casts, and in the recent spoiler cast, I raised some of my personal criticisms with Breath of the Wild. And even though I think I didn't have quite as good of experience in Breath of the Wild as a lot of people had, like it was like my number three in 2017. Whereas it was a lot of people's number one. And I do feel like Tears of the Kingdom for me was like kind of just like better in most ways. Like having the experience of playing Breath of the Wild and knowing some of the things that kind of put me off of it, like actually kind of helped me navigate the way the game is structured a little better. Like, but also I liked the cinematic, like, and storytelling in Tears of the Kingdom, and I sort of liked some of the exploration elements and like the gloom. I liked I wouldn't say that I'm like a huge fan of building crazy vehicles or whatever, but like I liked those systems better than Breath of the Wild's physics systems, like fiddly physics systems, and like a lot of and both of them are really good games, and I liked what they did in terms of like story and gameplay and like the adventure. But for me, like Tears just was a smoother experience, and I liked most of what it did. Better than Breath of the Wild, which is a game I already enjoyed a good amount, even though I complain about it a lot. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so yeah,
One thing I'll pick up on that you did talk about there was I really did enjoy the way they did their storytelling in Tears of the Kingdom. I thought that was really cool, and some of the swings that their story takes are pretty wild and interesting and fun. Um, so I appreciate it a lot for that too.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
I knew you had it on your list too.
yeah, it was my number four, and yeah, I obviously like this game a lot for sure. And pretty much for a lot of the same reasons you guys said. I love Breath of the Wild, and this game is a lot more of that, and it did add some new things like the depths and the and all the building stuff. And kind of as I've thought about it a lot since, like, I feel like Ultra Hand is kind of the main thing, and I think that's the thing that would have made this rise higher on my list, is if I did get more into like the crazy building and crafting. And that's kind of not always been my favorite things in games. Like, I kind of do it as needed, and turns out you don't actually have to do much of it in this game if you don't want to. But like, even with that, still, like, I mean, yeah, it's my number 4. All of the things you guys said, absolutely, feel the same on. And yeah, like exploring that world, even with a lot of it being this like the same world, it was still just like tons of fun. And there's just tons of cool stuff to do and see in this world. Like, it's a great game. Like, yeah, I feel like it's pretty undeniably a great game.
Yeah, and I didn't even get super into the building stuff. Like, I played with it and fiddled with it and like would slap things together and go, hee hee, that's silly, that turns like that. But like, I didn't get like super into it. But yeah, I just like the way that these games play so much, and the way they encourage exploration so much. It's just like that. Breath of the Wild for years now has been just like my happy place that I can go to at any time, and I look forward to continuing to just like go back to Tears of the Kingdom for the next couple of years and like poke around more at the edges that I didn't see because I didn't spend enough time to like fully see everything in that game. So it will be one that I'm picking up again, I'm sure, and like just finding new cool things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's a big one to do that with. You could go for hundreds of hours. All right, yeah. No, Tears of the Kingdom is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, those Ryan and Nate's number 1, my number 4. Excellent game. And it brings us to Will, your number 2. Or number 1, sorry. I can count today. Will, your number 1 game of the year.
It's hard. And I'm going to say you can probably guess it.
I think I can, but I'm going to let you say it.
It's Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew, by Me Games. R.I.P. Pour one out for them. So this is sort of a refinement of their formula, this sort of real-time tactics that they have honed over the years, from Shadow Tactics to Desperados and now to Shadow Gambit. And this is sort of, to me, almost kind of like like a magnum opus in a lot of ways. There are so many different characters with so many interesting abilities that are much more creative than the things that we've seen from them before. So, for instance, let's say you have a body of water that you need to get across. There's a badge you can get called Wombo Combo, where you take a character that you have who has a cannon, who can shoot one of your other characters across. So you can shoot a guy over to the other side of the river or whatever, and then use this fishing hook ability that the other one has to grab one from the other side of the river, to grab the guy who just shot you and then pull them over. And there are a lot of little tricks like that, like ways that these different abilities can kind of work together to help you do different things. There's like a castle that I had to infiltrate at one point, and I thought, like, well, I don't want to go in the front door, so I like loaded up my team one by one in this cannon and just shot them up on the top of like I don't even know what you would call it, like the walkway where the watchmen are patrolling, and then I basically started my infiltration from up there because of the way that I was able to use these abilities. I just think it's great. And there are these crew tales that each character, you get to flesh out their backstory a little bit and kind of figure out who they are, what are their motivations, why were they on this pirate ship, and how did they end up in this crew. Those aren't like life-changing or emotional or anything for the most part, but they are compelling enough. I guess two things that I think the game does.
Will, you don't think teaching that fish to be a stealth master was emotional?
I'm so glad you did that one first, because it's fantastic. And Toya is so amazed that he keeps getting it done too, man.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh my god, dude!" He's just sitting there. Anyway,
Yeah.
so
It's pretty
um,
good.
so here are some things that I think are amazing. In this game, in this type of game, what's long been a staple of this type of thing is that you're going to die all the time. You're going to try something, you're going to try strategy, you're going to lose, try strategy again, fail, try strategy again, fail, and then try strategy again and get it. And to the extent that the game, even in previous iterations, will remind you if it's been a while since you've auto saved or since you've quick saved. It'll say like 5 minutes since last quick save. So if you fuck up now, you're gonna have to go back 5 minutes. But in this game, like they basically integrate that into like the structure of the game to the point where your ship has the ability to recall these memories. It's not just like an outside of the game gimmick. It's like now part of the game. And to the point
your
where
ship is a character who like speaks to you telepathically, I guess, but like
yeah,
your ship is constantly communicating to
the
you, and
Marley.
and the red Marley is actually
Yeah.
like a big driver of the story. So like the Marley having this power is like part of the story.
Yeah, and it can even be subverted, which I won't give any more details on that, but that power can be subverted. Another thing I think is really smart because they have so many different characters in the game is you can actually upgrade for the first time in any of these games. You can upgrade an ability that one of your characters has, and you do this by obtaining experience, and you obtain an experience every time you send a character on a mission. If you neglect to send a character on a mission, he'll bank an experience that you'll then get the next time you send him on a mission. So let's say I take 3 guys and leave 1 there. The next mission, if I take the one I left, I'll get 2 experience for completing that mission instead of just 1. So it pays to switch your team up and try every different combination. And that way you get to see a lot of these cool interactions like this wombo combo thing that I mentioned earlier and different ways to kind of make it happen. It was great. Really, the only thing I really have to say about it that I didn't love, I thought the islands got a little samey at sometimes because sometimes you'll have to do multiple missions at the same island and the enemy layout won't really change. And so sometimes there can be a temptation to just like, well, I've kind of already done this and maybe I'll just go do it the same way I did it the first time. But there are multiple ways that you can kind of enter the island too. So for instance, there might be one island that has 3 different entry points. And so every time you play the island, you can choose a different entry point and that'll give you a slightly different experience. But it is overall the same island with the same enemy layout. So that sometimes I think it's probably tough to build these maps, I would imagine. So I was definitely willing to put up with a little bit of repetition there. But otherwise, I think it's just an absolute perfection of that formula, that real-time stealth tactics formula. It feels as good as it ever has to sort of orchestrate some sort of system where, I'm going to distract this guy, and then this guy's going to look over here, and then he's going to see the skull, and he's going to start walking toward the skull. Then my other guy's going to come up behind him and stab him, and you can kind of plan something out for each one of your characters, just like you could in Desperados, and then wait for a specific time to kind of unleash that plan. So if you like stealth, if you like tactics, give it a go. It's good.
Yeah, they've just like this game's on my list too, not in my top 5, but yeah, this game's really great, and it's very clear that this developer has like accrued domain expertise over time, because you can just see like in the UI and the way they display information and like allow you to queue up actions and all of that. Like it's very clear they've just learned how to do this and make it so user friendly to do these like complex stealth actions with just completely wild abilities, because like the abilities of the characters are just the most ridiculous things.
Yeah, they're pretty insane.
Yeah, but they work really well. And yeah, my favorite thing is something Will already mentioned, which is it incentivizes you to switch up your crew a lot. So every mission is beatable with any. You always take 3 characters, at least so far. I haven't finished the game yet, but and like each trio of characters is going to work together very differently. So like it always feels like it never feels that repetitive. Like you're always trying different combinations of characters and thinking, oh, how would these 2 work together? How would these 3? And I think that's really cool.
And one thing I've found awesome is actually looking at tier lists online, because they're almost always different from me. Like there's one character who can kind of like mind control one of the enemies. His name is Pincus. And there are tier lists, like there are multiple tier lists who put him like up near the top. They're like, Pincus is my boy. I could beat any mission with Pincus. And Pincus was like my least favorite character. I felt like he was a niche character. Like there were a couple missions where I'd prefer him, but most of the time he just sat there building up XP because I felt like he kind of stunk compared to the ones who could like take a dude out super fast or, so it seems like everybody who plays this game kind of has different guys that they think are the best, which I think is a real cool thing.
But you and I we know that Suleighty's the best.
She is sick. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
All right, but that's number one for me. Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew.
Yeah. No, this game's great. That's awesome. All right, so rounding us out is my number one, which is on some other folks' list as well, which seems to be the obvious one for this year, but it is Baldur's Gate 3. And yeah, it's been talked about a lot, but I mean, a lot of the stuff that's been said is absolutely why this game landed with me. Like, it feels to me like among games I've played, like the game that has best encapsulated just the sheer the sheer scope of possibilities that come from playing like traditional pen and paper RPGs, just like kind of that feeling that anything can happen and anything's on the table and whatever crazy idea you want to try can work. And like I have not played another video game that kind of replicates that feeling in the way Baldur's Gate 3 does, and it's kind of insane how they pulled it off, and that they pulled it off with like the level of like I guess production behind it, because like the things like the writing and the voice performances and like all of those trappings like really do elevate it. I think this game has really good narrative beats. Like before playing Baldur's Gate 3, I would say things like, oh, the Mass Effect trilogy, or like maybe even Fire Emblem Three Houses, or some of the Persona games like those that I think of just like, oh, like these characters that are so memorable and like have really good character stories. Like Baldur's Gate 3 is right up there with anything else I've played. So like that stuff definitely adds to it as well. But it's really quite insane how divergent player paths can be in this game. Like I legitimately don't know how they did it. Like there are so many little details of like things that can happen that like loop back in later, and you can have like really profound story arcs with seemingly minor characters that could straight up die the first time you meet them, or could like change the entire fate of like some group of characters later in the game if certain things happen. And like so many things in this game that like there's so many things in this game that only 1% of players will see, but they put all that stuff in the game, and it's wild, and it makes like the experience you have playing the game like just feel so unique and so tailored to like the role-playing choices you've made. And it feels so adaptable to like whatever you want. Like I've read so many stories online of like things that people have done or things that have happened to people, and it's like, wow, like your experience was so different, like based on the things you tried to do and the choices you made. And I think also the way they've adapted like the D&D rules set to a video game, like obviously it's never going to be a perfect one-to-one because that's probably impossible to do, but like you have really good you have really good options to like play both in and out of combat. You have really good options to play within the D&D rule set that they've implemented, at least the version of it they've implemented, to like how like if you're playing actual D&D, like a good DM will like, if you have a crazy idea, they'll like figure out some way to let you do it. This game feels like that. It feels like it'll let you set up whatever ridiculous idea you have. It's like, oh, I'm going to try this in battle, like try and, using this item in this way and, attacking them in this. And like, from what I can tell, the vast majority of the time it seems to work. And like, that's like kind of when I think about video games at large, like what we come to play with them, like it just feels like the possibility space in Baldur's Gate 3 is just so tremendously expansive. Like it's just really impressive, and I got really into this game. Obviously, played every like within my playthrough, tried to wring everything out out of it I could, tried to see everything I could, and had a blast. One of my favorite games in quite a while. Just super loved it. Would absolutely love to play this game again. It is too long for that, so I don't know if/when that'll happen. But like this is like one of the number one games I've ever played of like immediately finishing and being like, man, I would love to see like a different playthrough, like do a different playthrough of this game, doing different stuff.
The story stuff, as I've talked about in our main channel, has been a little bit compromised for me. So Baldur's Gate really got as high as it did on my list just by virtue of the strength of its like build diversity, which I guess is the strength of D&D's build diversity, and then also just the combat. Like there were all kinds of really amazing, memorable combat encounters that I've had. I remember because I'm playing our party's tank. And so there are times where the whole rest, I remember there was some encounter where there were like 6 guys left and some of them were up on a ledge and there was no way up to them. And I was the only guy still standing and I didn't have a ranged weapon, but I ran over to one of the guys that we killed earlier and grabbed whatever crappy bow they had and then was able to finish the encounter with their terrible goblin bow, just to try and like figure out how to make it happen. And there's all these times where you'll be looking through your inventory and you're like, I totally forgot I had that scroll. Maybe that could use that here. And sometimes that scroll, whatever random scroll or potion you have, will end up being the difference between you like winning the encounter or not. Whether or not you remember you have it. I had all these like thunder arrows that knock enemies backwards, and I was like shooting them behind enemies to like have them fall to the sides into pits and stuff. And there was a major boss that I just knocked off of an island, and he just died, and that was the whole thing. And he had like 150 HP, and I just pushed him off the top of this island and he fell into nothing. So, there's all these like combat encounters and build diversity things, which to me, and I'm looking forward to at some point maybe getting, sinking my teeth into story narrative pieces of Baldur's Gate. But for now, I mean, I think it's a very strong game, just in terms of build diversity and combat. Even if you don't take the narrative, which according to this guy we're talking about right now, is a really good part of it. So it's a strong game.
Yeah, and like I don't know that the core narrative is like I think it's good, but I don't think it's the strongest. I think it really is the character stories, like all the like your main party, of course, but even a lot of the side characters. Like there's just such good character writing in this game.
And it's tricky when if you're playing a whole party of player created characters, then all your guys who have these really interesting arcs are stuck back in your town, and you'll get back in there and they're like, you did this without me, and you're like, yeah, I mean, I couldn't have brought you because I have 3 of my friends, but so that kind of dampens a little bit of things.
But I also think it's great you can play it that way, that you can play it with like 3 friends and have your group of created characters and like that's your story, and like that the game can still be fun without like the pre-written characters.
Right. That's true.
And Ryan, I know this was a highly ranked game for you as well. What do you want to add?
Yeah, I would say so. And I did play a lot of, I guess, CRPGs and, well, quote unquote BioWare RPGs. Like I've played the first 2 Baldur's Gates and Planescape Torment and things like that. And I'd say Baldur's Gate 3, a lot of what you alluded to, it does remind me in some ways of those kind of old BioWare RPGs, but very modernized. And I would say, there's a lot of good there. There are some things. There are a few negatives. Like it reminds me of a few of the, a few certain play patterns and things. Some of which are nitpicks, but I also did have some technical issues, some UI clunks, some like event triggers that kind of didn't go off. So there are some things there but yeah, the Forgotten Realms is a really kind of interesting setting, and so it's kind of cool to come back to it and like see some characters. Like there's been sort of a generation shift, but at the same time, like as somebody who played the previous games, like some of the elves from those games are still alive. Like they're much older now, or like you sort of have this sort of weird thing with Minsk and Boo and some of the other characters from the previous games. I think, as you mentioned, it's just really impressive what they've done with sort of like the 3D. Like you're able to customize your characters. Um, all the characters around you are fully voice acted, but it still didn't feel that weird that your protagonist is mostly silent, or the way that you interact with the dialogue. I thought they did a really cool job with that. Yeah, the character stories, a lot of those are pretty cool, and you have some pretty big side quests depending on which characters kind of you work with. Sometimes you might do entire side quests, kind of, and that's kind of stuff that would sometimes happen in those original games. Uh, what else was there? I guess the other thing is the combat system is kind of different, both for better and for worse. Like it's a little slower to play and very complicated, but at the same time, like some of the anecdotes that Will was sharing, I certainly have some of my own of like pushing people in weird ways, or like using items randomly and stuff, just like there's just all kinds of weird and wacky stuff that is very unique, I think, to like the way that Larian has implemented these systems, and a lot more complex
Yeah, our
than most
sorcerer is
of
a
what you could
wild
do.
magic sorcerer, and so there's a random chance that all kinds of goofy stuff will happen whenever he casts. And so he'll cast sometimes, and they'll spawn like a random imp, and then we have to deal with a new enemy, or he'll like switch places with the guy that he casts at, and then we have to get him out of trouble because he's like in the middle of everything, and so there's all kinds of stuff like that that makes it
Yeah,
pretty
it's
dynamic.
pretty amazing. Like all the just like the first time I popped, I walked by like a random animal and like was looking through my inventory and was like, I have a potion to speak with animals. And then it's like I drink the potion and start like having a conversation with like a bird or an ox or whatever. They just do some really wacky stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think like I said, I have a few things that didn't click with my playthrough, but it was a lot of fun. Um, and I enjoyed my experience with my human fighter.
Yeah, fighters are awesome in this rule set. Yeah, and at some point we haven't done a full podcast episode yet, but we probably will at some point. Just haven't gotten there yet. And I guess the last thing I'll say is like like often when we think of like big set piece or big moments, like a lot of times they're scripted. I feel like Baldur's Gate 3, we all have like big moments that are not always scripted, and like I like just so many memorable moments. It's really cool. All right, we did it, y'all.
Yay.
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah, so we just talked through everyone's top 5 games of the year. Before we go, if everyone would, if you so choose, if you would like to shout out your full top 10, and if you want to just give like a 30-second, very quick pitch for any game we didn't talk about already, feel free to do so. But Nate, would you like to count down your full top 10 if you have one?
Sure. I have a rough order here of some games that we have not talked about in my top 10. So I'll count down from 10.
Go for it.
Okay. My current number 10 game is a little game called Luck Be a Landlord.
All right.
Which is essentially a roguelike deck builder in the visual styling of you playing a slot machine to pay your rent. And you are through a run adding symbols to the slot machine, and they all have different effects that like combine based on getting a row of this symbol or a column of that symbol or things being next to each other and all these synergies and weird things. Mechanically, like it's fairly like it's fairly straightforward roguelike deck builder kind of stuff, but it's just like super snappy and kind of funny and charming, and I played a lot of it for those reasons on the Steam Deck.
Nice.
Number 9 is Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is a sequel to Jedi Fallen Order. It does a lot of the same things that game did well, and tries to mix things up a little bit for the sequel, but overall pretty solid Star Wars action game with Soulsy style combat.
And
That
we did also do a full episode on that one as well.
Yep, that I did enjoy a good bit. Right now at number 8, I have a game I just finished this morning, so we'll see where it really lands when I've thought through it more. But I have Little Gator Game on here, which is a good throwback 3D platformer. I think is probably the genre you would put that in, as like a be a little guy and jump around and collect things, and it's charming and cute. You're a little gator trying to get your big sister to play with you by gathering friends to play in this fake fantasy hero game that you've made up. And it's just cute and charming, and you gain a lot of like goofy abilities to traverse the world or interact with things in different ways. I have number 7 is Hi-Fi Rush, which is a kind of beat 'em up action game, but with everything being also a rhythm game, so things being on the specific timings of the beat of the soundtrack matter in mostly in the action combat, like hitting the timings of on the beat gives you more damage and lets you do combos and things like that. So it's just a neat idea, and they did it pretty well, and it's got a very stylish look, and had a lot of fun with that at the beginning of the year. Then I have number 6 is Resident Evil 4, the remake that we did talk about. So I won't go into any more detail on that. So I guess
cool that you liked it that much, though.
Yeah, no, I really did like it. Had a lot of fun. Like I said, I really wanted to keep playing it after I finished it, but I kind of moved on to other things. But yeah, it's a very, very good remake, very good reimagining. So yeah, then my 5 that we already kind of went over. Number 5, Doomblade. Number 4, Sea of Stars. Number 3, Pikmin 4. Number 2, Cocoon. And number 1, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
Very nice. Congratulations, sir.
Yay, 10 games. In like a month or 2, it will probably be very different.
Same for me, yes. Well, you have... Nate, you're on a clock. You and I guess, because I know once a certain Final Fantasy game comes out,
that's kind of the end of the 2023 games for me.
Yeah, your 2023 playing's probably over at that point.
Yep.
2024 is coming.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, Will, how about your top 10 for the year, if you would like to read?
Sure. So right now, at number 10, I've got Jacint. It's a game about climbing a giant tower, and periodically, as you're climbing, you read these diary entries that are really boring. But the climbing part is fun. So, and it feels pretty good, and there's a lot of interesting little puzzles where you have to kind of figure out exactly how you're going to get up there. But that's that. 9, I've got a game called Golfinit. And it's basically like infinite, but with golf instead of in, so Golfinit. And it is kind of an arcadey golf game, which is just really like elegantly done. And a lot of the challenge in the game, you get to sort of mitigate by having balls that feature things like aftertouch or drop or boost or the ability to redirect them. So there's all these little abilities that you gain that you can do with your ball to kind of get it to go where you need to conquer these really difficult courses. But it's just a really fun arcadey thing. I think I played it on the Steam Deck and loved it. 8 is Pikmin 4. 7 is Unboxing the Cryptic Killer, which is a cooperative, I guess you could say it's kind of an escape room game, but you each play as one of a pair of detectives that get trapped by a serial killer in this sort of like Saw-like kind of game, I guess, like the movie Saw or something. And it's got this really cool pulp comic art style, and the puzzles are really interesting and really well done. And you have to kind of find your way out of his little trap that you've unfortunately fallen into. At number 6, there's a game called Black Skylands, which is an open world top-down shooter. It has a lot of cool customization options for your character and your skyship, and you're kind of flying around from island to island, trying to liberate them from these raiders that have taken everything over. There's also kind of some skyship combat that you're doing in the game, but it was a good time. And then, as we already talked about, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 are Final Fantasy XVI, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Wild Hearts, and Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew.
Nice. That is a solid list.
It's 10.
It is 10. All right, Ryan, would you like to read out your top 10 for the year?
I would. A lot of unique items on each of these lists. Mine, I guess, is no different. So my number 10 is Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which I would say is kind of like the Saturday morning cartoon of video games. My number 9 is Star Ocean: The Second Story R. I guess a couple things I would say is I really liked sort of the game's first act story, and it has some kind of breakable systems, and the private actions are kind of interesting. And it's a JRPG, which I hadn't played before. But in particular, those things. Number 8 was Final Fantasy XVI, which we've talked about. Number 7 is Trinity Trigger, which is a game very much inspired by the Mana series. I think they have some like the composer and maybe one of the original designers worked on Trinity Trigger, but it's an action RPG which has kind of a cool weapon swapping system, and it actually did more with the characters and the story than I expected it to. So that was kind of a fun game, and I'm also a pretty big fan of the Mana series. My number 6 was Dave the Diver, which was kind of like a bit of a surprise indie sim/survival thing. It does a lot of different gameplay styles, kind of centered around the diving, which is sort of pseudo survival gameplay, and then like the running a restaurant, which is sort of like a sim game. But it had a lot of really funny pixel art cutscenes and like a lot of little goofy character moments that were genuinely funny. And then the ones we talked about, my number 5 was Armored Core 6. My number 4 was Fire Emblem Engage. Number 3 was Baldur's Gate 3. Number 2 was Rune Factory 3 Special. And number 1 was The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.
Nice. Cool to see Star Ocean made it. That was I haven't played the remake, but the original was a big favorite of mine. And if you missed the big debate around the Game Awards, Dave the Diver is not an indie game.
Okay. It feels like an indie game, but what is it, like AA or something?
I mean, it's just technically not indie in that it has a publisher, like it's funded. But
I see.
But yes, it does feel like an indie game, yes. Which is what you mean, I know. Yeah, cool. Awesome. That is another solid list, and I will round us out with mine. Most of which we actually have talked about. But my number 10 is the Talos Principle 2, which is Does a lot of the good things I liked about the first Talos Principle. Just a good mix of puzzle solving and some light philosophical banter, so to speak, and the sequel kind of expands all of that in all directions at once. And quite enjoyed it again. The puzzles are still really solid in that game. Number 9 is Sea of Stars, which we talked about. Number 8 is the Dead Space remake, is the other survival horror remake that I really enjoyed this year. I think this game really benefited from like the, I guess, modern hardware, current technology, so to speak. Like the atmosphere is such an important part of Dead Space, and I think just the current consoles can really do that justice in a way that I think elevates it above the original in a cool way. Number 7 is Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew, which we talked about. Number 6 is Cocoon, and then which we also talked about, and then the top 5, of course, Resident Evil 4 remake, Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Number 3 is Chants of Sennaar. Number 2 is Pikmin 4, and number 1 is Baldur's Gate 3.
What a year!
What a year indeed!
What a year!
Mm-hmm. I got a new job in November. That happened this year.
I think I said it before, but there were a lot of, I guess, unlike some other years where we tend to have a lot of similar items, I feel like, or overlap, a lot more overlap. It felt like some of the, especially those bottom 5 items, were kind of very distinct. It's a lot of different games represented.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I probably have close to 10 games that I didn't get to, and I think all of us are in a similar boat of, yeah, there's even more we have to play. It was definitely a strong year for sure. And we'll get some more new video games next year too. We might. What do you say about doing this again in a year?
Let's do
You
it.
think they're going to come out with games next year?
Believe it or not, there's going to be more of them next year.
Oh my God!
Oh, Switch 2, right?
Maybe. Well,
let's not start the rumor mills.
But for 2023, that's going to do it. That has been our favorite games of the year. This has been another episode of the Atacs podcast. I've been Flex, joined by Nate, Will, and Ryan. We are signing off of 2023 as well. Have a happy new year, everyone, and we will see you next time.